Welcome, everyone. It's a delight to have you all here. We are thrilled today for one of our very special events. We call these project recipe events, which I think are kind of central to what we're all about here at Project Kin. As we were just getting started, we were talking about the impact of stories that mean so much to you. Your voice cracks, you feel that tightness in the chest, perhaps even a few tears burst out because the stories are that important. And that is really the key to what we're all about as a community, finding ways to make sure that we can tell those stories that are so important to our family while still being cognizant of important characteristics, important rules, essentially, for family history, making sure that you're protecting the artifacts for your family legacy, protecting the privacy of living individuals and the privacy and dignity of the stories and the context in which they were intended. And as a part of that, what we're really all about is helping families tell those stories in ways that transcend the physical media that the artifacts and materials might happen to be on, like printed photos, and help them move back and forth into digital media as a way to tell those stories. And that's what we're going to be focusing on today. These project recipe events, in my view, are one of the most important things that we do as a community, because it gives us a way to look at a specific project someone took on, why they did it, what about it worked, and what else they might do differently going forward so that we can then build on that. And to support that, each one of these project recipe events is supported with a recipe. And you'll find all of those things in our archives. I will publish all of that immediately after the talk, with the recording to follow shortly after. Now, in this particular event is very special to me because our speaker was the first person to step up and say, "I'm game to do this," scheduling it out into October. Joining us today, by the way, is Anna Schutz, who earlier ended up with the first project recipe event just a week ago. In this one, Kerri is speaking to something that is not only a very sensitive point to every family, but also speaks to something that is something she's built her own career on. I've shared a little bit about that in the written material ahead of this event, and it's probably part of why you're all here. I am just thrilled to have her here speaking on a topic that means so much to her, both personally and professionally. So with that, I'm going to get out of the way. And if you want to advance one quick slide for a little bit of logistics here, Kerri, thank you. I think I'm beating the 5-minute rule on this so that Kerri can have as much time as she needs to speak. Afterwards, we'll have some time for discussion, and I think that's going to be a very important part of all of this. A little bit of wrap up, and then my rule is I try not to let any of these presentations go more than an hour with a recording, but we can go another 30 minutes, whatever you'd like. We just turn off the video and let us have it, and I call that the after party, which seems to work. One more slide, Kerri. I guess 2 more here. A little tips on using Google Meet. I know Google Meet is new to many of you and a bit different from what you're used to with Zoom. The first rule I like to use is to tell people to pull out the tab, and by that I mean click on the tab and literally pull it. It will separate out into its own window. That's very helpful in case you get an email or something, jump over to another tab, and then you've lost it. You don't know where all this conversation's coming from. That's a very useful way to do it. Google also releases Meet as an app, which you may see a little tiny arrow in the top menu. You can pop that out, and it's basically like pulling out in a tab. One more slide, please, Kerri. One of us had to be in charge. For using the mechanics of Google Meet, basically it's all in the kebab. That's the little button to the left of the hang up button, the phone icon, which honestly is kind of silly. And the other action buttons are over to the right of that red phone button. Like the ability to see who else is here and any chat and conversation. Remember, there's no one-on-one, so if you think you're talking to one friend, you're actually talking to all of us. And I now export all of the chat because so often we include useful links in there. I include all of that in the archive. If you add HTTPS to any links, they will be immediately linkable. So with that, we can go on to the next slide, Kerri, and oh, well, okay. Um, you'd think I'd know these slides by now. Remember, all of the notes, the resources, the recipe, and of course the recording will all be in our event archive. That QR code gets you there. It also is a reminder of how we do use QR codes, but you can also, of course, click on the link to get there, and we'll follow up in there. If you're not yet, well, you wouldn't be here if you weren't a member, so welcome. Membership is free. All we needed is the email address. You get the invitation, and poof, you're a member of the club. We're special that way. So with that, Kerri, now why don't we go ahead and get started? Oh, my goodness. All right, it's not a pitch. You knew this. I'm not selling anything. I don't have anything to sell. I don't have any affiliates, no sponsorships, no nothing. We all just tell the truth. That's all we're here for. At some point, I do plan to make this a nonprofit, but we'll get there from here. So now, Kerri, thank you. Now I'll duck out of the way and put myself on mute.
Okay. All right. So I'm super excited to get to be here today. This is a real passion project for me. And so I appreciate those of you that took time out of your busy days to be here. So the first thing we have to do with the topic we're talking about today is kind of get real about families today. And this kind of image is what I found to represent what we think our family trees look like, maybe even sometimes what we would like for them to look like. And then this is what really most of our family trees look like when we start digging into them. So the burls and the twists in the family tree, we all have them. No matter how we represent ourselves, we all have them. And many times they're referred to as the family skeletons, and they may come out a generation or two later. And that means that they've been kept as secrets. And those can sometimes be very, very closely held for a lot of different reasons. But today, some of the reasons that we have skeletons or secrets, common things in families, can relate back to a divorce in the family, to adoption. Someone had an affair and perhaps a child came from that. Sexual orientation or same-sex unions are certainly a part of families. Children who either went into foster care or who were adopted out of foster care. Surrogacy, embryo and sperm donation, and there's tons and tons more reasons why our families may have a limb that gets a twist or a burl in it. I like to look at the super fabulous things that these twists and burls offer to us in our families. It really often shows strength that someone showed in the face of adversity. I certainly have at least one that I can immediately think of that was truly a free thinker before her time in my family. Creative approaches to solving problems or facing circumstances, people who were learning from mistakes that they made. But most of all, what I find is many times the burls or twists in our trees really are showing that someone loved enough or committed enough to carry the family forward. And that's what I really love about them. So my project is a Princess ebook. It is a book that I wrote for my daughter. She's 19 now, and I wrote it for her whenever she was 1. And so 18 years ago, before Barbara got me on to ebooks and those kinds of things. But now for this presentation, it now is also an ebook in addition to being a printed book. And it has linked web pages, it has QR codes, and then my daughter still has the actual book. Okay, so this is a quote that I've used in some of the research that I've written about family and family constructions, and I love it. It's from Elizabeth Stone. It says, "The particular human chain we're a part of is central to our individual identity. Even if we loathe our families, in order to know ourselves, we seem to need to know about them just as prologue. Not to know is to live with some of the disorientation and anxiety of the amnesiac. The reason I love this is because it really speaks to some of the secrets that over the generations have been kept. This one in the particular speaks to children who were adopted into their families. And we have come out of, thankfully, a time now where we believe that children have the rights to their stories and that those should not be secrets in the family. But there were many years that even psychologists and counselors and the people who were supposed to know felt like it was best if we buried those and made them secrets in our family. And it disconnected children from their actual stories. And so this quote really highlights that all of us have an origin. And all of us have a natural human desire to know where we came from, whatever that is. Now, if you've been to any of Barbara's talks before, you know she often states this, that family history, family stories all starts with stuff. And I think that one thing that people don't realize, if in my case, at least my husband and I adopted 2 children, and sometimes that causes people to think that there probably isn't a lot of stuff. There's actually a lot of stuff. And I went to our safe when I was getting ready for this talk and pulled out some of the stuff. This over here is a congratulations card that was sent to us from the biological grandmother of our son. This was the book that was on display in our attorney's office, along with many other books of parents who wanted to adopt. And this was the book that his biological mother and our daughter's biological mother saw and chose to meet with us from. This is a piece of a diary that I wrote. I kept diaries for both of our kids as we went through the adoption process. This is an ultrasound from my son. I was with his biological mother throughout her pregnancy. This is the adoption papers. And then this is a photo of one of my children right after they were born with their biological mother. And so these are all things, and many, many more, that individuals who have adopted, they actually have lots of stuff, just like we have for our biological children. So in the stuff are the stories, absolutely. I think what's fascinating about the topic that I'm talking about today, and the idea that this entire group is about stories, is that stories have been really powerful teaching tools forever. You only have to look as far as the Native American population to really see the power of the story and how it teaches both the current generation and the next generation. That's really kind of the premise behind everything that I'm going to show you today. So my goals for this project, I had 2 very young children, both of whom came to us through adoption. And I firmly believe, as a personal stance, that their stories are, that they own their stories and that they have rights to their stories. And I wanted to really help them to make their stories very familiar to them from a very early age. I wanted to avoid a situation where they suddenly found out they were adopted, which is a very damaging type of position to put a child into. So I wanted them to be familiar to them, and I wanted them to be accessible to them in the moments whenever they suddenly were wondering. And that might occur, you know, at any time in a day or a week. I wanted to frame the story for a child, but in a way where details could continue to be added and they could ask questions as they grew older, and it was more appropriate to share certain details with them, and then to honor the rights to their stories. I've always viewed myself as a keeper of their stories. I don't have rights to their stories, but I was the adult, and so I was the one that kept them for them. So we're going to hope here that this works, Barbara, because what I'd like to do is show you, maybe, hang on just a second. A glimpse of my daughter's book. So her book is called Little Fairy Princess. She was this still is this very, very petite, delicate child, and she was captivated with princesses. even as a very, very 1-year-old, 2-year-old. And so I used the princess theme to write her book. And so this is what it looks like when it's been converted over into a digital format. I took her original print book and converted it into a digital format to where it's now accessible on any sort of electronic device that has internet access. And so I'm going to flip forward in a little bit so that you can see how the pages move, which is just a lot of fun for kids, although she's 19 and she loved getting a chance to look at this. I want to take you over to here. You're seeing this little piece right here on the screen that shows you that I've added audio to this book. Now, Barbara and I couldn't figure out how to make the audio actually play for you today, but it's been recorded also in my voice, and I'll talk more about that a little bit later. But if you'll forgive all the movement on your screen, I want to get over here and show you that we get over here to some pages and they have this QR code, and it can be, you can take a picture of it with your phone. So like if you were looking at it from a print book or an electronic, a child can take a picture of it with their phone and it will take them to the actual website it's associated with. What I did is in this book, I went ahead and hot linked it to the website. So you see that in this part of the story, and you're not following the story, so I'll just kind of bring you up to date. And this part of the story, it is talking about the mother, the father, and the child they already had, which would be my daughter's older brother, my son. And when you hit the QR code, which is now also a link, this is not his real name to protect him or hers, but it takes you to a web page then, and it tells them on the day you were born, here's what was happening. And then it has 3 photos. These are actually my children. And it tells, you know, he loved to snuggle his little sister and what he loves to do and so on and so forth. And so I love this part that Barbara really introduced me to, because it allows, it would have allowed me then to go ahead and put out onto a web page what was appropriate at this age. But because the web page is dynamic, I could have gone ahead and continued to add more information as the child grew and wanted more out there. So here's my page, and this is my husband and I before our children were born. This is me with my daughter. I was a photographer, and that is that. And then my husband has a page about him. And then perhaps most important for this child is that she has her own page. And so this is her and a little bit of information about her. And so again, these are dynamic pages. And so it's something that as web pages, I could go back as a parent or a grandparent or an aunt and continue to update those pages with more information as the child grew and was ready, really, honestly, for more information. So, okay. So let me hit present here again and get us back to full screen. Okay, so now I'm going to take you through really the steps to do a project like this, which is really what we're about today. We're about the recipe so that if you want to do something like this, you can. So if you have a child in your family that you want to tell a story to, and in my case, I specialize in sort of the hard stories. So children who were adopted, children born of surrogacy, children, I have a nephew who has an aunt not in my family line, who has a same-sex partner. All of these can be kind of challenging topics when children are very little and you're sort of torn as a parent between teaching what your own values are and conceptions of some of these critical pieces that they will deal with as they grow up in life, like what is a family, what is a marriage, How do babies get made? I mean, these are all challenging things that all of us as parents, we approach at some point with our kids, and many times grandparents are deeply involved in those conversations, or at least they have more experience than the parents do. So when you want to plan a story like this, there's some questions you're going to want to start from as you think about it. The first thing is, what do you want the child to learn? Well, I wanted my child to learn her story, and that her story was hers, and that it was special, and that it was unique, and all of these things. So I really centered around her origin story, how she came to be. What is age appropriate? I've referred to that a couple of times. It's obviously not appropriate to tell a 4-year-old certain things that a 15-year-old or a 19-year-old is ready to hear. My daughter is 19. There's still details of her origin story that she does not have. That's not because I'm holding them from her. It's because she has not yet come to a point in her processing where she's asked me those specific questions. So when she does, she's an adult, and I'll share those. But you really want to think as you write about what's appropriate for now, and then you can add to that. What are useful metaphors or frameworks? My daughter's story is about a fairy. My other daughter loves horses. Her story is about horses. My son's was my very first book, and I don't remember if I had a metaphor, but I probably did. Do you want to use a co-author? There's lots of options for this. When I wrote my youngest child's book, one of my older children co-authored with me and absolutely loved getting involved in creating a book for her sister because she already had a book. The child themselves may be a co-author with you. That's a fun thing to do and write with a child and create a book with a child. Then you're going to want to create an outline or a story map. And I tend to be, I'm sure Barbara probably is an outliner. I am a story mapper. And so I'm going to get out colored markers and a big white piece of paper, and I'm going to map the story because that's the way my brain works. And both of those work just fine. One thing I want to note, and again, my kind of specialty area is the hard stories. So I want to note that children will tend to create fantasy about some family situations. So in speaking specifically about adoption, a child who has been adopted is going to wonder about their biological families. It is innate to us as human beings. So when that happens, and in the absence of information to fill in those gaps, children will create their own fantasies about what a missing biological mother, a missing biological father, a missing biological grandparent may be like and look like, and so on and so forth. So I really, really, really can't emphasize enough how important it is that you always, in writing these types of stories, attend to what the long-term trust relationship looks like between you, the author, and the child whose story it is. So sticking with the facts or fact-based representations, bottom line. Now, was my daughter actually a fairy? She was not. And she knows that that is a metaphor. I asked her when she was about 17 if she ever really thought she was a fairy, and she laughed and said, no, I always knew that it was just the way that you told the story. But embedded within that story and what was happening to the fairy and what the fairy was doing and the decisions that the fairy was faced with, all those kinds of things are all fact-based representations in the book, so that as she learned her story from a fairy metaphor as a young child, the facts remained the same. They never changed. She got more information, but they stayed the same. If you don't know something, if something or someone is truly missing and you don't have information, then the very best thing to do is either leave the pieces out, or in her book, there is a missing person that we have no information about. And so he is represented in that way, but there's no additional information given about him. I created nothing to represent him because I have nothing. And as she grew older, that let me be truthful about that with her. Then you write the story. It's a great idea if you're an adult and you haven't been reading a lot of children's stories lately to kind of look at some and get an idea of how authors put together flow, how much information they put on the page for what age of child, and so on and so forth. Get feedback of other people, definitely, that can help to further develop ideas. Definitely use an editor, someone else who's is good at writing can help you and work with you to really get, wording in good ways and in good flow. Be careful with the reading level. You want to think about this carefully. Do you plan this to be a book that an adult is reading to a child? Because that's a little different than if you are creating a book that you intend the child to read themselves. So my son's book was created for him to be able to read. It has 3 and 4 word sentences that are simple words. My daughter's book was created for us to read together, and so it's written at a little more complicated level. Preparing the illustration. So after you have your story and your storyline, then you want to start thinking about how you're going to illustrate the book, because children's books it would be incredibly rare to find a book that is not illustrated, because children, and really all of us, respond to the color and the visual that is in a book. So you can use clip art for that. The very first book that I did, my son's book, is all from clip art. You can use photos, and this is a representation of that. This is another book, a second book that I did for my son, and it told a true story, and I actually took photos for the story, and this was one of his preschool teachers, and she cooperated in helping with the book, and this is an actual photo of her that he then recognized whenever he read his book. This is a drawing, really it's a watercolor piece that was created for my youngest child's book. And I hired a person from the local high school to do that. Now I want to show you, and I've deliberately left the blur off of my camera because I want to show you that I still have, let me see if I can lay my hands on that one. I still have the actual, on the paper, on the work that the artist did, and I've saved these. These are in a fire safe for my youngest daughter, so that if she wants them later in life for a child of hers or for something else, she has access. I'll show you on this, the other artist that I hired, which also was from a high school. These are actually art boards, and these are the original illustrations for my other daughter's book, and they are on art boards, so that later, if she wants to have them to display in some way, she has them. She actually is planning to do a tattoo. She's an adult now, so she gets to do these things. And she is planning to do a tattoo, and she's going to use one of the images from her book because it's so meaningful to her, because it's her origin story. Strangely enough, she's been planning that for a couple of years now, waiting to get to the age of majority, so mom had no say. And now my youngest child, and the girls have not talked about it, is what I discovered, but now my youngest child popped up last week and said, when I turn 18, I want to get a tattoo. I think I want to do something from my book. And so it's been very affirming for me as a parent that their books at 17 and 19 have stayed with them and have mattered to them in that way. Okay, so you have your story and you've done your illustrations. A couple of things that I encourage you to think about on illustrations is to use only actual photos or actual representations of what the person really looks like. And this goes back to the fantasy creations of children. They're trying to fill in the details for whomever it is that is missing. And so you want to be very responsible about how you handle this. Silhouettes and photos from the back are good substitutes if you don't have actual photos of the person. And then, of course, there's lots of options for clip art and some photos. This image right here was done by one of the illustrators. I lost my sister whenever I was 30 years old, and she never saw any of my children, and we were very close. And so I provided the illustrator with photos of her, and the illustrator incorporated it into my daughter's book, my youngest child's book. And so this actually looks like her. This is a clip from my other daughter's biological mother's webpage. And you'll see here that for you, I have blurred out the facial image, the facial features of her. But this is one of the few actual photos I have of her. And then you'll see that here I used a representation of probably a parent and a child from the back, because my daughter has an older biological sibling. And then here it is just a silhouette. So I made sure that hair color matches from the back and skin color matches from the back. But other than that, you don't know that it's this person versus another person. So it puts a representation there, but it doesn't add any details that are not actually truthful with the child. Okay, so we've talked about writing the story. We've talked about the illustration. So now we think about the digital pieces, which, 18, 19 years ago, I didn't think about, but I think about them today. So for anything that you're writing today, you definitely want to think about this. And that really starts with which pages are you going to supplement. So in the book I showed you, I supplemented my son. I supplemented her biological mother. I supplemented for me and for my husband, and then I supplemented for her. Those were the characters in the story. Now, one thing that I want to note is I didn't have a page for her biological father because I don't have information about him. So I created nothing there because it is representative of the void of information. I added narration to it. And if you are an aunt or a family friend or a grandmother, please, please, please do this with your digital work, because then the child has your voice forever. And that is just golden. If at some point, well, I guess when at some point we're all gone, that remains for the family that is actually in your voice. You can certainly add music, and then we've talked about web pages and that you can add details to those. Barbara is far better than I am, so certainly in the question phase of this, we certainly want to be concerned about privacy, and I'll talk more about that in a minute. And she will be much better than I am at talking about web pages and how to maintain privacy when you're using that type of media. So then you write a dedication or some other message that you want to write as an author in an interior title page. So this is a book that I wrote for my 3 children about how families get made, because our family was made differently than the traditional intact biological family structure that we tend to, return to over and over again. And so I wrote this piece for them, and it's at the front of their book, and I just blurred their names out. And then this is just a title page. Looking for Mr. Cow is a book that I wrote for my son when he lost his beloved cow. Then you're going to send it to production. So for me, there's lots and lots of options for you now. When I did the original books, I published them through what is now called Kindle Direct Publishing. My daughter's book, my youngest, this one, you can actually go out on Amazon and it's out there. So you want to be kind of careful with the access to it. This one, if you can see that, Looking for Mr. Cow, that is my son's book. It was published differently, and there's no access to it other than if you have, the book in your hands. And then this one you can see was done even differently because it doesn't have a picture on the front. And so I, at that time, didn't have near the options we have today. And today we have a lot more, but you want to be careful about, if you publish through Amazon, it's going to be out there on pages. So you may want to choose a publisher that does not then share your book with a wider world. Ebook software, again, Barbara is much better at that than I am and can help with that. I use Simple Booklet. I had a great experience with it. QR code generator for the little QR codes that went in the book, I used Canva. And the web page maker, I used Canva for it. I'm becoming good friends with Canva via Barbara, and it's quite a wonderful, wonderful tool. Okay, so I have kind of continued to refer back to the hard stories, because that's really where my professional work lies, is in working with young people who came from hard stories or confusing circumstances. But there's so many other things that you can do with these books that are so much fun. So these are 2 that I did. This one, again, I've mentioned it was done for my son, and we took actual photos, and he still will look at it if it comes across his lap. And it was about the loss of his very beloved Mr. Cow. And frankly, my husband and I were in a complete panic. And the story of how he was found, and then all of his preschool teachers are in that book helping us look. This story was a lesson for me, a very, very important lesson for me as a parent, because I wrote origin story books for my two children who were adopted. That made sense to me because they had a hard story that I needed to help them understand. When my youngest daughter, who is a biological child, was about maybe 4 or 5, she came to me and her feelings were really hurt that she didn't have her own book. And it really taught me a lesson that all of us have a special origin story that is worthy of a book. And so I, of course, immediately went to work writing a book for her. My youngest daughter was born with cleft lip, so she also had a hard story or a hard start. And that is why her horse story is horses, except for her, and hers is a unicorn. So a horse, but just with a twist. So how a lost story was found, you could write books about when we don't win to teach lessons about recovering from hard knocks. You can write about family traditions in your family. My dad has a ranch and our kids have grown up around that. So animal books about that can be written, and then origin stories for everyone are great. When it's a hard story, especially, it's really important to talk to the child on an ongoing basis about privacy issues. And one thing that I really encourage anyone who's dealing with hard stories to do is to be super clear about the difference between private and secret. Private means that they are in control of their story and their details, and they get to choose who has access. Secret, when we keep secrets, they are bound typically in fear or shame. And so I have always been really careful to differentiate, especially for my children who were adopted, that privacy is something that they control. Secret is something that we don't play in as a family because of the implications of that. We have no shame and no secrecy whatsoever about their adoptions within our group. But going beyond that, then they're in control. So before I ever told Barbara I would do this presentation, I sat down with my 19-year-old and talked about it with her. And she provided the permission. Otherwise, I wouldn't have done it, frankly, just bottom line. So they own their story. Once it's age appropriate, let the child decide who has access. This is a balancing act in the early years because my children wanted to show all their friends their books. And so it's a constant ongoing conversation with the child about they have the right to do that, but you as an adult judging when they're old enough to make those decisions. And then they have the right to change their minds. Print books, put them on the shelf. All the books for the kids were on the shelves with all their other books, and I would sometimes walk into their playroom and one of them would have their books out and be sitting reading it. It normalizes it, that their story is normal. Their story is just as special as any other book that's been published out there, and that they had a right to get their book out and read their stories and ask questions about it at any time that they were so moved to do that. Ebooks and web pages, again, Barbara will have insight into this, but I just urge caution. Just because a web page is out there doesn't mean it needs to be public. And I would discourage you absolutely from doing that on anything that is a hard story, because the child needs to decide who has access. And certainly once we go to web pages and ebooks, they can easily be shared. And so it's really a good idea to think through the safety piece of that for the child and how you want to handle that. And if you're the grandmother, for example, with their parents, and that includes what devices the child has access to and how they may be able to share with others. So this is kind of my ending. This is obviously my passion area. And so if you have been sitting there thinking about a hard story that is part of the life of a young person in your family, and you're not quite sure how to approach it, that is something I'm happy to, as a fellow member of Project Kin community, sit and talk with you about and kind of brainstorm how you might approach a hard story. Here's my direct email address. I'm on faculty at Oklahoma State University, and you can reach me directly there. Or Barbara always knows how to reach me. Okay, Barbara, it's all you now.
Mute button. Yeah, thank you so much, Kerri. That is just fabulous. This was one of those key stories that I've been excited about since the day I first heard the inklings of this idea. I'm so privileged that your approach to these hard stories are something that all of us are learning the subtleties of in the same way that you learned from your own kids, things that even you hadn't thought about. And I hope that's something that this community can help us help each other through these kinds of challenges. Looking out ahead, as we've said here, I will have a topic in the forum in just a few moments after the program with the PDF of the recipe itself of this presentation and links to anything that seems relevant. We'll talk a little bit about this offline, Kerri, afterwards, about what to include in there. And then, of course, any of the commentary, and that includes those of you watching this afterwards. I would like to add one special point, which is thank you to your daughter for giving us the go-ahead to do this. I hope you, if she's interested, have the video available to her to watch and to see how much it's meant to so many other people to be able to share the idea for doing this. Do we have another slide after this? I think we do a little bit about the different kinds of events that we have. Yeah. Well, there you go. Again, this will all be in the forum. That link, I think, takes you to the forum. But with that, why don't we take the slides down and open it up to questions? Remember that to ask questions, you're going to have to take that mute button off, which is down at the bottom strip on the far left, to take yourself off of mute to ask a question. And while you think about that and what your questions are and where your mute button is, as you were telling the story here, I was reminded of how when our own kids went through, we put them in a Montessori program. Neither my husband nor I had any familiarity with Montessori. It seemed like some kind of weirdo Mooney thing. But no, we were completely smitten with it once we got our kids into the Montessori programming. And one of the things that I loved was the ways in which they would celebrate a child's birthday. So whenever it was anybody's birthday, it was not an occasion for parents to schlep in with stacks of cupcakes or something. That might happen. But the important thing, and the kids quickly learned, the important thing was a little ceremony they would have, which had nothing to do with religion or anything else. They would celebrate each child's circle around the sun for that year. And parents had to bring in pictures for each year of the child's age. So I do have little stacks of pictures I keep bumping into with envelopes with, up to year 5 and up to year 8. No wonder I could never find the other pictures because I'm not that organized. I can totally see even those kinds of ways of recognizing those moments in a child's life to be celebrating, even as whether we're doing it for our own children or for many of us are more of an age where we might be doing it for our grandchildren and grandnephews and nieces to celebrate those moments and special occasions. So it's really more of a long comment while the rest of you think about a real question for you to ask. Go ahead. I'm going to back down and open up the floor because I know you have questions. You took the time to be here.
Anne?
You're muted, Anne.
I was concerned about my speakers again because I lost sound earlier.
Thank you so much. That was just so wonderful for you to share that story with us, to know what you did, but how you did it as well. So thank you. And my question, I haven't got any younger people in my family. I'm kind of at the other end looking after older people. And I'm wondering if you've got any thoughts or experience of adapting a book, maybe helping with someone who was approaching the end of their life or dementia or anything like that? Is that kind of adaptable to that sort of thing?
You know, I haven't done that, Anne, but I have. It's interesting that you asked that, because I just thought about that a few weeks ago with a friend of mine who has some dementia in her family, and the opportunity that she really has to put together a book that has the main sort of characters in the family and a little bit about them that could be sort of a remembering tool during this time that the dementia has not progressed to a point where there's no recognition. There's still some recognition there, and how wonderful that would be have at bedside. So I think it would be a fabulous, fabulous, very meaningful project. I haven't done one myself.
Boy, I would just second that thought. I think that's a brilliant idea, and I love that. And as many of you know, I cared for my mom with vascular dementia, which is a very long tail dementia. And she had recognition of people that she saw frequently for a very long time through the dementia, but the context was really difficult for her. Early on, being innocent, I created basically a Facebook, a page with all of the faces and all of the names. And that seemed to, well, that should just solve it. No. A book that's like a children's book, but speaks to them at their level, but has prominently the name and a prominent context and a prominent photograph of that context could be really, really helpful. That's a great idea.
Yeah, it is.
Thank you.
Hi, Simon.
I scratched my neck.
I caught you off guard. I was glad to see your name pop up.
Well, I was then looking at who said it, because it wasn't quite clear where the voice came from.
It's me. It's me.
I don't have a question, but I would just share that you brought back memories of a wonderful lady who turned out to be a friend of my parents, but she wrote children's books that I remember so clearly. She was called Althea Braithwaite. Probably not heard over there, but she was over here. And I literally just, while you were doing that, it made me think so much that I looked her up. But she wrote these books. Does that work? So those are modern covers, but can you see that?
Oh, I am familiar with these, Simon. I didn't recognize the name, but yes, I have seen these.
So she, this is her here. She's an absolutely lovely lady. She died a couple of years ago. I was in a very bad way, actually. But actually tried to commit suicide a couple of times. She was had something. Where was it? I had her obituary a minute ago.
There it is down at the bottom.
Where was it? No, there was a Guardian. There was a Guardian. There was a Guardian one that had a picture. Oh, there. But yeah, she went through a lot of things, and her father was in the Air Force and went to Singapore and died in the war and everything. But she wrote these Desmond the Dinosaur books, access to all sorts of things, and then really turned into doing those, which obviously very relevant. That's not a question. It's just that you brought up a memory of that absolutely dear person.
Well, I think it's an important contribution, though, Simon, because it's amazing how much we retain of the children's books that we read or were exposed to frequently. And, like I said, I'm shocked that my daughters 17 and 19 are now at their age, when they haven't been around them, of course, for years, that they're going back and wanting to put something permanent on their body, which, whatever, that is from their books, which tells me that they have really stayed with them. And so I think it's an important contribution, Simon, because I don't think we always realize the extent to which children's books stick. I mean, they're really a fabulous way into a child's mind and heart.
Because when you were saying that, actually, I was thinking about her most, and I had an image from one of her books, exactly what you're saying. And it was really rather touching in later life. I was able to get her to sign a book that I'd had, 40 years before.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And imagine if you could open that book digitally now and hear her voice reading it. So I think when we stop to think about that, it's motivating for us who are involved with family stories, and probably many of us family historians for our families. I am. I'm sure many of you are too. That, gosh, if you could hear Grandma's book whenever maybe you have a child and it's now their great grandmother, but it's not just you telling and showing pictures, but the child actually hears great grandma read the book. I think it's a marvelous way to keep ancestors alive for the next generation.
With the process of making some of the pages, I was struck by the immediate thought was AI. So I mean that when you did those, because clearly sending off and getting to know an infrastructure of people who can assist you, very professionally in your case, opens it up more to the rest of us. Where like the watercolors, where the on the bed, you could do that with AI now and keep it consistent and say, I want it to look like that.
You could, but you guys, I'm telling you what, do not discount your high school art program. Every one of the illustrated books that I have, I contacted the art teacher at my local high school, and it was in 2 different cities. And the art teacher was thrilled because it gave a high school student who is an artist an opportunity to make a little money. And I think the most I paid was $200 for an entire book, because they're high school students. $200 was a lot of, now that was, almost 20 years ago, but $200 was a lot of money for a high school student. And of course, the art teacher contacted the parents of the illustrator and made sure everything was kosher and all of that. But man, it is a super resort, a place to go for fantastic illustrations that is very, very tolerable from a cost standpoint.
Yeah, I would underscore that, but just and to Simon's point, when you've got something and you need to fill in a blank, and you want to do it in the style of, that can also be a great way to combine the two. But the using local real artists in producing this also creates a community that has contributed to the book and creates the original artwork that becomes itself an asset and a legacy for the kids and family, which I think is especially lovely. In fact, your remark right at the beginning touched me on several levels. You said, in the stuff are all the stories, or something to that effect. And I'm reminded of a conversation Anne and I had early on as we were struggling with the name for what would become Project Kin. And I thought of names relating to stuff. Double stuff was kind of where I was headed. I thought it was brilliant for about 10 minutes. Because stuff it makes it small and unimportant, when in fact what we mean is the opposite. We mean treasures. And I was convinced on that point, because it just as a name, it's unclear what we're doing. But you have illustrated an example on levels from a lost child's toy to the treasure of who you are as a person, and how the artifacts that we carry on bring those stories. And I think that's an absolutely critical lesson to learn as parents, as well as the keeping it child-centered, and how to really think about it. And your daughter's younger daughter's lesson about, why don't I have a story? Aren't I important? And in the ways in which you found the framework. I would really emphasize that your early slides talking about having a framework that can make sense to kids, because, not having written a child's book, I don't even know where to begin. But creating a metaphor and a framework to tie the narrative together and have that classic arc that gives the child a way to pull it all together is really brilliant. Because just having it there is not good enough. Actually, it's got to be good enough. And that's absolutely lovely.
Thank you.
So I will be pulling together, as I said, all of these bits to, with the idea being it's something that we can create on our own, and have the community to come back to and ask questions as we get stuck. And thank you so much, Kerri, for making yourself available to doing that. I've had an opportunity at my local FHC, Family History Center, here in Oakland, which is one of the big ones, very near me in what is essentially a very large metropolitan area, and to do a talk like in person with real people, slides and everything. So I'm going to be doing that the first week of November here. And I've decided to focus it on family history projects as gifts for the holiday season. I figure it's going to make a kick there. I'm going to start with my own project because I feel like I can speak to that, and show them very quickly how to assemble it all in less than 90 minutes. But if you all want to think about those kinds of ways that we can expand this story to others and other communities, let me know. Drop me tips and suggestions. I think all of you are here because you, I'm going to guess, believe in what we're doing, believe in this idea of the importance of stories as part of family history, and would just encourage you to think about ways that we can be building on this, because it's getting exciting. And if I may put a little plug in here for Anne and Simon, the two of you participated in an incredible program last weekend for the Society of Genealogists in the UK. That was part of the Society for One Place Studies, if I have that hierarchy right. And they reached out to the literati in the space and invited them to do presentations, which each of you did multiple presentations on, and they're really quite fun to watch. But it's also a reminder of, at several levels. One is the content in the presentations, but also ways in which these kinds of things that can continue to spread out and innovate and give people ideas. In that case, what I certainly came away with was the genius of recognizing how a place itself is like a member of the family. It is a part of who you are and where you are. And of course, from out here on the West Coast, where our history goes back to like 1850, actually 1848, I think, is when the state of California was founded, which is really young. That's younger than Hawaii. In terms of written history, of course, the indigenous peoples were here thousands of years before that. But having that place and that sense of history and that sense of where things are from can also be part of a larger storytelling. So are there any other questions we have before we take down the recording? All right. Well, with that, I'm going to stop the recording. Thank you all for your participation, very formally here. And then thank you, AJ. And then we will move on to the after party. How about that? There we go. Stop recording.